Hello, BookTube. Try to control your surprise at what I'm about to tell you, but I've got a huge amount of books to show you. I have an old friend here in Boston who texted me just recently. He runs a church, and he also oversees the church's sort of ongoing charity sale. And they get all kinds of donations. Those of you who know church charity sales will know what I mean. They get old, clothing and shoes and kitchen appliances, occasional piece of furniture, and boxes and boxes and boxes of books. And he texted me and said, if your errand's going to take you near my neck of the woods today, feel free to come in and just fill your shoulder bag with books that you want. And as usual, I joked with him and said, well, that's not really a good way to run a charity drive. And he reminded me that just recently I did a small favor for a parishioner of his. It was nothing I wouldn't do for anyone. But apparently she and he think it's a big deal, so he reminded me of that and said, it's not quid pro quo, but I'd still feel better if you came over and just got first crack at these. There's so many boxes that, you filling a bag with books is not going to change anything. I would throw away that many at the end of the sale. And I told him, according to your own scripture, charity is supposed to be without reward and done in secret. And you're not helping things any. I said, you're like the megaphone of the opposite. And he said, I'll confess it. Just come in. So I did. I had an errand that was taking me near to his neck of the woods. I think he knew that perfectly well. Probably got information about that from his boss. But one way or another, I went in and I filled my bag with books, and I wanted to show them to you today because it's a really interesting variety. Lots and lots of different things, including a few works in translation, which I ordinarily don't do, and one of them is a mass market paperback, which I almost never do. But it intrigued me because I've seen it before, and I've never actually got around to reading it. I think I've actually sold it. It's from the old Kodansha press that did so many Japanese translations into English. And this one is by Morio Kita, and it is The House of Nire. Big multi-generational family saga that, if I remember correctly, the author, he would have been writing I think he just recently died, but he would have been writing this in the early part, the first half of the 20th century. And if I remember correctly, he early on in life as a young man fell in love with the novels of Thomas Mann. This is always perilous right there. And I think he sort of patterned this after something like Buddenbrooks, a big sprawling family saga that reflects its time and its culture. And I never got around to it. I don't know why. I think I might even have had this copy when it first came out. When did this first come out? This is Kodansha Press, translated, of course, by Donald Green. There was a time when you couldn't, if you walked into a Japanese or a Chinese restaurant, or no, a Japanese restaurant, if you went into a Japanese restaurant anywhere in the Western world and sneezed, Donald Keene would appear from behind a partition and translate. When was this edition? 1990. Okay, so I probably did have this at one point. And it probably sat on my shelf and then for a while, and then I thought, no, better get rid of it. You're not reading it, you better get rid of it. I know that I never read it, and I am not able to read it in the original, so I will read this translation and see. It always makes me wonder. Oh, for Pete's sake. That's metal, little girl. Here, if you're going to misbehave, you can be on camera. Then the next one is a translation again. It's also a paperback, but it's a trade paperback, and it's a translation that I can read in the original. But that, in a way, makes it me... I mean, I'm distrustful of translations of the Greek and Roman classics, but in a way, I want to read as many of the translations of them as possible. And I've had this one in the house in different forms many, many times. I don't think I've ever actually read it. And it's my favorite book of them all. This is Ovids Metamorphoses in a big, fat, white Oxford trade paperback. The translation is by A.D. Melville, whose translations for Oxford I think I've read before, but not Ovid. So I couldn't leave this there. I mean, I don't have it. I think I have only one English language translation of Ovid here in the place. So now I have two. We'll see. The next one is an object lesson, BookTube. Don't let it happen to you. About a year ago, at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, which is, those of you who don't new to the channel, maybe it's a great used bookstore here in Boston. I used to live there. Used to go there every day. Still one of my favorite places to go. It's still a revelation for book lovers. They have outside bargain carts, $5, $3, and $1. And the stock is really good, unlike a lot of other outdoor carts where it's, you know, part 3 of a 4-part technical manual and no other parts, or rain-damaged goods. The books in the Brattle sale lot are really good books. They would be the stock of another used bookstore. And about a year ago, I was there and I saw a whole bunch of the seafaring novels of Patrick O'Brian, the Aubrey and Maturin seafaring novels of Patrick O'Brian. There were a whole bunch of them there in hardcovers with the decal edges and the beautiful dust jacket artwork and whatnot. And I didn't have any at the time. I had, years before that, I had bought a complete paperback set at a library sale and sent it away almost immediately to somebody who wanted the whole set. And I wanted them. The Aubrey and Maturin books are books that you reread. Those of you who haven't read them, maybe you're thinking about it. Once you get into the mood of them, they deliver such dramatic goods that you will reread them. And I knew that. So I knew that I wanted the whole set, no matter how much. It takes up a whole shelf of a bookcase, and I tend to not to like that. But in this case, it's a thing I know that I love and will reread. So I bought them all. I bought all the hardcovers that were at the Brattle that day, got them back here at Hyde Cottage. I was glomming all over them, cleaning them up, dusting them off, putting bookmarks in them, and I realized that a couple of them weren't there. It wasn't a complete set. That might have been why it was out there in the first place in the sale lot. One way or another. That's terrible when that happens to you. Not just because you have an incomplete set, but because if you're like me, from then on, you can never remember which volumes you have and don't have. So you are, like the Flying Dutchman, you are cursed to forever by that author in that set, thinking it might be the one of the volumes that you don't have. That's going to happen to me forever. Until by random chance I happen to find the hardcover volumes that I need in the Aubrey Maturin series. So when I saw, there was just a couple of trestle tables covered in open boxes of books, and I was rummaging through them all, and when I found an Aubrey and Maturin novel, I got it because of exactly that, because of the curse of Patrick O'Brian, where I don't know which ones I have and don't have. Turns out I have it, but I'm probably going to reread it anyways because it's so much fun. It's The Wine Dark Sea. This is number 16 in the series, which opens with a bravura extended passage where the HMS Surprise, our hero's vessel, Jack Aubrey's vessel, the Surprise, is chasing a privateer. Just both of them going full out. The privateer trying every trick he knows to decoy or distract or evade or outrun Jack Aubrey. But as Patrick O'Brian puts it, he has no chance, because although he is wily and wary of the ways of the sea, he has 1/5 of the experience of Jack Aubrey. Jack Aubrey can see every trick he's going to pull before he tries it. It starts with that. It starts with a massive chase scene. And then, to punctuate the chase scene, there's one of the most dramatic moments in any Patrick O'Brian novel where both ships encounter the eruption from the surface of the water of a subsea volcano, which can happen very quickly, catches both ships by surprise, damages both of them, and is an amazing, amazing piece of writing. And then the book goes on from there. Jack Aubrey is a sea captain. Stephen Maturin, his best friend, is a surgeon on board his ship, but he's also a spy. He's a counterintelligence agency who wants to encourage independence anywhere that guerrillas or nationalist movements are fighting for independence from an imperial power. In this case, freeing Peru from its imperialist yoke. Stephen Maturin's real hatred is for Napoleon Bonaparte. But in this case, he's perfectly happy to go to Peru and try to foment rebellion there. And there's a whole bunch of that takes place in this book where we are not on the high seas at all, where we're with Stephen Maturin as he's making a torturous trek over the snowbound mountains, where he's losing toes to frostbite, where he's hair's breadth escapes from colonial powers that want to crush the rebellion before it happens. And all of it done so well that I swear, Patrick O'Brian is always called a seafaring adventure novelist. It's his stock and trade. It's the cover of every book. But I swear, when you're reading those adventures, you don't even notice that you're nowhere near a ship of war, that you're nowhere near the ocean, and that you don't have your usual cast but for one. Just amazing. Amazing adventure writing. And then he manages to get, at the end of the book, he manages to get to the point where he has brought the plot kind of full circle, because now it's the surprise that's being chased. And it's the chase scene that ends the book is every bit as thrilling as the chase scene that starts. It's just wonderful. And despite the fact that I remember it very well, I will probably reread this paperback just because I got it. Then the next one was a find. It's something I admit I have never read. It's The Gone Away World. It's Nick Harkaway's debut novel about two friends in a weird, slightly alternate, slightly present, slightly future world that gets darker and darker in more and more science fiction-y ways as they progress. And the reason that I grabbed it, and I'm a little ashamed that I haven't read it, is because his next book, Tiger Man, is incredible. Absolutely incredible. An amazing novel. And the book after that, which is, twice as big, it's bigger even than this, it's twice as big as Tiger Man, is Gnomon, which came out this year and is one of the best novels I've read this year. It's just amazing. Amazingly ambitious. I will need to read Gnomon again before the end of the year just to get to hammer it down in my own mind. So I was, of course, fascinated to read this guy's debut, since I know already I'm a fan of his, despite the fact that the cover blurbs compare this book to Kurt Vonnegut. I'll overlook that because I think it will be, even in its first few chapters, considerably better than the entire life work of Kurt Vonnegut all smushed together into one book. Then next one is something I always tell myself I'm not going to buy books for their editions. I always tell myself, seeing an old book, especially a classic, and getting it just because you think the edition is pretty is a sickness. That's wrong to do. I always tell myself that, and then I always cave. And in this case, I did. It's The Murders of the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. Look at how nice that looks. Isn't that nice? This is what is this? Modern Library paperback with the sepia spine and this beautiful cover design. With an introduction by Matthew Pearl, who wrote the Dante Club, and it was just going to go in the bag, and I haven't read Murders in the Rue Morgue in quite some time. I think it's a fairly silly novella. I mean, the main character, Inspector Dupin, is fascinating, of course, and groundbreaking, but the book itself is about as silly as The Sign of Four. But anyway, I got it anyway. I probably won't hold on to it, but for rereading purposes, to reread, I got just a pretty paperback. And the next two, I saw them together. They're both from the same publisher. They're the same type of thing in my mind. And there was room in the bag, so I got them both because it's a healthy thing to do when you read a book and absolutely viscerally hate it. It's a healthy thing to do to periodically, if you have the time and the inclination, go back and try it again. Just to see. Especially if it's not, if we're talking about a love-inspired Harlequin romance and you read one, you don't like it, you just think, no, that didn't do anything for me. There's no reason to go back because it took the author 6 months to write at speed. It was edited hastily, and it isn't meant to be revisited. But if the book in question is obviously a serious, ambitious piece of literature, or has some sort of ambitious, complicated backstory, and you read it and you hate it, I always like to make an effort to go back to some of those books. Some of them are just beyond the pale, but sometimes I go back to them, and I found two together today that fit that description. So I got them both, and I will reread them both. The first one is The Four Fingers of Death by Rick Moody. Big, gigantic book of his that is, again, compared to Vonnegut. And starts off in a kind of a weird, fractured version of the late presidency of George W. Bush. But it goes on from there. I thought it's extremely mannered and precious and self-conscious, just like Kurt Vonnegut, where no matter what readers think of the book, no matter how many readers absolutely love it and think it's the most clever thing in the world, their admiration for every single bloviated line is nothing compared to the obvious admiration of the author for every single bloviated line. Writing like that drives me nuts. I absolutely hate it. I hate it when authors are swanning in the middle of their work. Vonnegut never did anything else. That's all that he did. And when he would haul his crapulent carcass into some new bookstore with a bunch of admiring acolytes who loved his books because they were so darn easy to read, you'd think that somebody who was constantly talking about how intelligent he is would understand the implied, although unintentional, deep insult in fresh-faced University of Iowa acolytes saying, your books are easy to read. But no, as long as it was praise, it was good enough. And he would walk into a bookstore with them and they'd say, what's good? What should we buy? Can you talk to us about different editions? And he would just silently walk over to fiction, point them at the letter V, and tell them to buy his own books. I remember The Four Fingers of Death being extremely Vonnegut-esque, so I'm going to give it another try. In the time since, this is the most ambitious thing Rick Moody has ever written, so I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to try it again, and if that was trouble to swallow, you can just imagine what the next one was. It's The Pale King by David Foster Wallace. This is the manuscript of a novel that he was working on when he killed himself. Right before he killed himself, he tidied up his computer desktop and all of his computer disks with all the different drafts and notes and whatnot for this novel, and there was also a drawer in his desk that was full of scraps and long notes to himself and whatnot, character sketches, plot outlines, all that sort of stuff for this book. His friend, a friend of his, a literary friend of his, pulled together all of that material in the wake of his suicide into this book, which I read. I read when it first came out, and I was torn because, of course, anybody in the world would feel sympathy for this poor guy killing himself, especially when the circumstances of him killing himself seem so... Well, I know with suicide you always feel this way, but they feel so preventable. He'd been on a very, very strong antidepressant medication and ultimately decided that he didn't like how it was making him feel and that he was going to change to another. And that period between two serious antidepressive medication regimens is well known for being incredibly vulnerable. That is when patients try to kill themselves. And he did. That's exactly what he did. And you can't look back at the circumstances without feeling not only how preventable it was, that if, swallow your pride. If you're going to do a major medication change like that, do it under supervision in a hospital. But also, pity. It's a sad thing. I might not be a fan of the guy's writing at all, but he had 40 more years of life. So I was thinking all of that when I read this book. Of course, I was thinking all that, and I was allowing all of that to soften my thoughts about it. Time has passed since then, and that pity has to dim down a little, especially since the books are immortal. And they can't get a pass forever. And the more I thought back on this book, the angrier it made me, because it was clear that its author had made clear from the beginning of his career that he considered the traditional novel to be a dead form. Nothing more it can do, nothing more to say about it. And anyone who tries normal dialogue, he said, she said, anyone who tries a normal dramatic arc, anyone who tries a happy or a sad dramatic payoff, a denouement, an ending, anyone who tries any of that boring old stuff that was good enough for, Jane Austen and Henry Fielding, they're just wasting their time. The novel is dead, and I am its obituary writer. I'm going to try something different. I'm going to try and save what's left of the novel. If you look at his novels throughout his career, that's what you see. Basically a contempt for the form that he chose to write in. And this book carries that to almost psychotic extremes. It was David Foster Wallace saying, well, what if I were to write a book about the most boring subjects I could possibly imagine? And not in order to make them less boring, but but just that. Just to write about the most boring thing I could. It's an IRS regional examination center in Peoria, Illinois. And it's a host of boring characters. And it's a host of boring things that happen to them or don't. And I remember reading it and thinking, okay, well, when I first read it, I thought, you have to cut the guy a break. He's dead by his own hand. It's a universal tragedy. There's no way around that. And this is not a time, nor any time in the near future, is a time to go jumping up and down on this book. And also, it's not really a book. It was Frankenstein together by somebody else. We have no way of knowing if this is even remotely like what it would have looked like had David Foster Wallace written it himself. One thing I know for sure is that he was going for a 2,000-page novel. He wanted to punish readers of fiction. He wanted to write a 2,000-page novel about an IRS document center and the photocopier there and the ugly carpet there and the elevator up and down to work every day there, and I got a squeak in my shoe, and boy, this line for lunch is really long. Without anything else, just that. Not any of those things leading to something else, just that. One thing I know for sure is that the book he would have turned into his publisher had he lived would have been almost 3 times this size. But as it is, I didn't know what to do with it at all. I read it and hated it, of course, but I saw flashes of the same rhetorical brilliance that you can see in any of his books, but also just an ingrained, hardened brattiness that it's getting to me even now. if an ingrained contrariness to the very genre that he was writing in that drove me nuts at the time, and I have a feeling he's going to do it again. But I'm going to read this again and see what I make of it. See if I make more of it. I don't expect to make any more of it as a thematic whole because I don't think it is one. And whatever of a thematic whole that it is, it's not his thematic whole, it's his friend's. So there are a number of grains of salt, but nevertheless, this was obviously a big, ambitious thing. He talked about it for years as that, constantly referred to it as this big book I'm writing. So I'll give it a try. I'm going to give it another try. I'm going to see what I make of it. I've got the time, and it's worth it. And I'm pretty sure that unless it strikes some sort of brass bell for me, I will just leave it after that. So it's possible that I will reread maybe, I don't know, maybe in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, maybe I will read Infinite Jest. When it becomes a Penguin Classic, I might read it again. But I don't think I'll ever read this again. So I'll give this a try and see what I make of it. And then to move on from that long, this author gets me every time. Because it's just a tiny little switch one way or another. And he could have been our Henry James. And instead, just this... Anyway, the next batch of books, you'll be able to tell, made me very happy. I have been having excellent luck with Penguin Classics in the last week. 2 of my subscribers, 2 of you, sent me packages with Penguin Classics in them. And I also got a Penguin in the mail, a new Penguin Classic that I was totally unexpected. Very happy to get it. And today I found not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Penguin Classics. So I'm still riding a Penguin quest in just filling out this whole room with Penguin Classics. The first one is a little beaten up. I'm going to reinforce it and use it as a sort of throw-in-the-bag beater copy of The Count of Monte Cristo in Penguin's big, unabridged translation. This one has years of life in it. I will reinforce it so that it's nice and strong, stronger than the new volume that I have on my shelf, and just use this as a read-along because I haven't read The Count of Monte Cristo in this English-language translation in a long time. So... it's well worth the time to do. I love Dumas. So the next one, an author that I don't like. So him and Rick Moody and David Foster Wallace. This is his most controlled book. This is the book of his that I like the most. And I didn't have it in a Penguin Classic, so I grabbed it. Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. This was the last of his formal controlled work. This was the last thing of his that was written by just a normal Irishman, by a normal guy. before he became a seer, a prophet, a starer into deep distances, and a distiller of pure literary crapola. Before he took the path, the same path, only a century earlier, that David Foster Wallace took, which is saying, yeah, I know what you're doing, Virginia Woolf. I know what you're doing, Henry James. I know what this Hawthorne guy did. I'm aware of all of that. It's just dead. I don't know why you don't see it, but that form has nothing more to tell us. Sorry. So I'm going to reinvent it. I'm going to show you what can be done by making it incomprehensible and unpleasant to read. And also gigantic in length. Because, it needs to be done. What else can be done? I am the obituary writer for this form. It has no future. This was the last book he wrote before he decided to take that path in literature. And when he's taking that path in literature and starting to write reams and reams and reams of incomprehensible, navel-gazing garbage, right up the street, Edith Wharton is writing some of the greatest novels in the English language, and not seeming to notice that the form she's writing in is moribund, and so on, all throughout the century. But anyway, I'm going to give it another try, despite all these diatribes. I really am going to go into all of these books with an open mind. I just use you for diatribes, that's all. Oh, and speaking of diatribes, oh my god, the next one was a pure diatribe by. This is Armadale by Wilkie Collins. Another thing that I will clean it up and reinforce it. And the reason I got it is because the other day in a video here on this channel, I made a slightly bashing comment about The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, and oh my god, I heard from the Victorianists. I heard from the Victorianists telling me, how dare you? Oh no, you're dead wrong. Oh no, he's the greatest. Our Wilkie is the greatest. And almost all the people who emailed me or texted me suggested that if I don't like The Moonstone, I should read Armadale. And I have read Armadale. I always think it's charming when you people pick some standard work from the Western canon and say, have you ever read? I think it's charming in a tooth-gnashing, homicidal rage kind of way. But when I saw a Penguin Classic of Armadale, which of course I don't have, I viewed it as a sign, again, from above. so I got it, and despite the fact that I was a little cheesed that people would ask me if I've ever read Armadale by Wilkie Collins, when I read 150 pages an hour for 8 solid hours a day, and I've been doing it for 3 times as long as you've all been alive, you'd think maybe you wouldn't ask me those kinds of questions. One way or another, despite that fact, it has been a long time since I read Armadale, so I will read it again to get the Collins cops off my back. And then the last Penguin Classic is a classic, just like the Ovid, a thing that I usually shy away from. More and more as time's gone on, I've shied away from reading the classics of Greek and Rome in translation, but more and more I tend to notice what's not in the translation instead of what is. And this is the Aeneid, Virgil's Aeneid. This is by David West, the translation, and it's in prose, not in verse, which Penguin sometimes did, and sometimes with really good results. So I don't think I've ever read the David West prose Aeneid, and I have no prejudice against it at all, so I will. I wish that, again, that Penguin had consulted me. Stilted little swatches from medieval manuscripts about Virgil are not as interesting as a full-color, nicely, sharply focused photo of a piece of column from a Roman ruin, for instance, or the bottom part of a Roman arch with the sun behind it. Something like that. Very easy to do. Much more evocative than this, but still. So that was the last of the Penguins that I got. And then the last book that I picked out, also something of a find. Something that I haven't read in I don't know how long. And I can't wait. I may read it first. And that's this. Francis Hodgson Burnett's Little Lord Fauntleroy. This is a beautiful Scribner edition. You can't, the spine is completely gone. But this has all of the black and white spot illustrations, and it also has all of the new color illustrations that were done for this edition by the original artist. There was an original artist for the first edition of this book, and the author got him back for a new reprint of the book decades later. This is still 100 years old, more than that, 150 years old. And it's the story of a little boy who is he's growing up in a seedy part of New York City, and he's perfectly happy. He's a wonderful little boy, bright-faced, very intelligent, very respectful, very outgoing, loved by all. And all of a sudden, a stiff old man, a lawyer, comes to the house that he has with his mother. His father is dead. His father died a while ago. And the scene about his father's death at the very beginning of the book, incredibly moving. I remember when I first read this book, I thought, you know, this thing cast a big shadow, but you're not much for kids' books. And then I read that scene and thought, oh, okay, this is one of those kinds of kids' books that are really for anybody. They're marketed as kids' books because they're about a kid. But this author never lets you down. And the old man, the old lawyer, comes to the boy and his mother and says, you're about to undergo a drastic change. You are now not just little Cedric, you are now Lord Fauntleroy. You are the heir to the Earl of Dorlington. And you must come back to England because you're going to live in a castle and you're going to be very wealthy, and someday you're going to be a power in the land with whole families and whole acreages depending on you and your vision. And the little boy has no idea what to make of this, and it's complicated by the fact that his father, who was the Earl's third son, was never expected to inherit, married his mother, who was an American, against the wishes of his father and against the wishes of his grandfather, who hate Americans. So there's not only is the little boy suddenly elevated to the role of Little Lord Fauntleroy, but he's automatically caught in an old-standing and very bitter family feud and has no comprehension of it at all. And the book is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. He ends up going back home to his family estates. He meets his grandfather, who doesn't really want to meet his mother. He's willing to provide for her, but he doesn't want to meet her. He hates Americans. But he's taken with the boy, just like everybody else is. And the boy is taken with him. And the boy assumes that if he's this big, bearded, awe-inspiring kind of guy, he must be wonderful. He must be a wonderful person. Wise, caring to his tenants, forward-thinking, generous. And the Earl hasn't been those things. He's been all right in his way, but he hasn't been those things. And it's the boy's belief in him that allows him, actually compels him to become those things. He realizes that he doesn't want to not be the version of himself that this boy sees. And that, I think, anyway, my first reading of it, that was by far the most effective thing in the novel for me. Was not Little Lord Fauntleroy, not Little Cedric, his story, but rather the amazing transformation of this crusty old man. I thought it was so convincingly done. And then, I had a copy. I forgot about it completely. I don't even know what my old copy looked like or where it was. It was decades ago. And I saw this and immediately thought, it's time for a reread. And this is a beautifully illustrated edition. I wish that it were cleaner. Now that I know that this exists, now that I know that Little Lord Fauntleroy exists in these old Scribner illustrated classics, I will keep an eye out for a clean edition at the Brattle. Because I have a feeling I'm going to want to put it in this room along with these penguins. I don't think anything else in this collection is going to get in this room. But this is going to be quick on the list to reread this. I have a feeling that I know what's going to happen every time I reread Burnett. I always have this. I always encounter this experience where they're just so good. She's just such a good writer, and on so many levels but she writes a very clean, very strong through line of a plot, so that you can read her books without even guessing the other levels. You have to go back and look for them, and boy, are they there if you do. So that's it. I wonder if I can do a Steve pile of these for this hideously long video. This is Little Lord Fauntleroy, The Pale King by David Foster Wallace. What have we got here? The Four Fingers of Death by Rick Moody. The Metamorphoses of Ovid, my very favorite books. The Wine Dark Sea by Patrick O'Brien. The Gone Away World by Nick Harkaway. The Murders at the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. The Count of Monte Cristo in a Penguin Classic. Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man in a Penguin Classic. Armadale in a Penguin Classic. And Virgil's Aeneid in a Penguin Classic, a prose translation. So those were the books I got today. I got a whole bookshelf of books that I don't need. Some of which are going immediately on my Friday reads, which I'll shut this video off now before it gets to be an hour, and I'll make a Friday Reads video. So I'll see you in a minute. Thank you, BookTube.